During the Roman occupation of Britain, the most popular way to dispose of the dead was burning corpses on funeral pyres. However, as Christianity grew, cremation fell out of favour and burials in church graveyards became more popular, based on the belief that on the last day the dead will rise from their graves with their bodies intact. By the early 1800s, rapid population growth led to overcrowding in urban graveyards, and they had to cope with too many bodies and too few graves. Social reformers viewed burial grounds as breeding disease and endangering the living. During the 1800s, the opening of many garden cemeteries on the outskirts of towns and cities alleviated some of the problems with burials. But by the 1870s, many of these cemeteries were surrounded by expanding suburbs and running out of spaces for new graves. Reformers continued to claim that burial grounds were a hazard to the living. They promoted cremation as a hygienic solution to unsanitary cemeteries. The story of the development of cremation in the modern age is a fascinating tale. It's one that involves legal obstacles, entrenched social attitudes, and religious prejudice. So join me as we explore all of these. The absence of laws regulating cremation did not prevent it from taking place. After Honoretta Brooks Pratt died in 1769, her will stated, "I desire my body be burnt upon the place where my late dear niece Anne Place lies buried." Her son-in-law, the Reverend Thomas Ackland, tried to have her will rejected by the courts, claiming she was not of a right mind when she signed her will. He was unsuccessful, and Honoretta's body was burned in an open grave at St George's Burial Ground in London. She was the first recorded cremated individual in England in modern times. And 100 years passed before an organisation was founded that introduced cremation and started to popularise it. In 1873, Sir Henry Thompson, surgeon to Queen Victoria and also an artist, producing paintings and sketches, attended a great exhibition in Vienna. He was intrigued when he saw Italian professor Lodovico Brunetti display a model of a furnace designed to incinerate a dead body. Returning home, Sir Henry published a series of articles in the Contemporary Review in which he discussed methods of disposal of the dead, graveyard pollution, and the benefits of cremation. He asserted that cremation should be discussed, tested, and ultimately adopted. Pleased with the reaction to his articles, Sir Henry invited supporters of cremation to meet at his home at 35 Wimpole Street in London in January 1874. The founding of the Cremation Society of England, 4 months later, generated unprecedented public interest. It was the opportunity to bring together those who are interested in the whole subject of cremation. Those people came from the arts, from legal backgrounds, from medicine. And they were very conscious that cremation could be seen as a way of curbing the cost of funerals, of saving the land for the living, and also doing something different. Sir Henry was appointed the first president of the Cremation Society of England, and a council was established to oversee its activities. Council members included Anthony Trollope, a novelist and author of Barchester Towers. He and others were chosen to show that eminent people supported cremation. Other council members included George du Maurier, a French-British cartoonist, illustrator and novelist. Thomas Spencer Wells, president of the Royal College of Surgeons of England. John Tenniel, a political cartoonist and illustrator of Alice in Wonderland. Ernest Hart, and English medical journalist and editor of the British Medical Journal. Rose Mary Crawshay, a campaigner against vivisection and for women's rights. She was the only female on the council of the Cremation Society. William Essey, a prominent sanitary engineer, was appointed the Society's honorary secretary and engineer. In his 1875 book, Cremation of the Dead, Essey argued that a return to cremation in the 19th century would improve public health. Though a member of the Roman Catholic Church which prohibited cremation, this did not prevent Essey from accompanying the body of Catherine Dilke to Germany for cremation. I'm standing next to the vault of Charles Wentworth Dilke. He was a radical 19th century politician. His first wife, Catherine, died in childbirth in October 1874. She wanted to be cremated, but that was not possible because there was no crematorium in the UK. So it was decided that Lady Dilke's body should be taken to Germany for cremation, as there was a crematorium in operation at Dresden. Lady Dilke's cremation caught the attention of many newspapers, and it had stimulated the debate about whether cremation should take place or whether people should be buried. Those who were for cremation said it would save the land for the living and that it would reduce funerary costs. But those on the opposing side said that it had the opportunity to cover up crime. Those people could be poisoned and their bodies sent for cremation, and any trace of that poison would be lost. The greatest critics of cremation were the religious authorities. In July 1874, Christopher Wordsworth, the Bishop of Lincoln, called cremation a barbarous and unnatural practice that would foster immorality. It would make resurrection on the last day impossible, as bodies should remain intact for the last judgment. In contrast, James Fraser, the Anglican Bishop of Manchester, championed cremation in England from as early as 1879. He said, "God could just as easily raise bodies from ashes in an urn as from bones in a churchyard." In January 1875, the Council of the Cremation Society decided that it needed to act. It needed to build a crematorium so that it could promote cremation. But they had to find land, so trustees were appointed to find land and to take care of it, and then to build the crematorium. In 1875, the directors of the Great Northern Cemetery at New Southgate in North London offered land along with the use of their chapel and other buildings for use as a crematorium. This would generate more income for the cemetery. However, the cemetery was located in the Diocese of Rochester, and its bishop, Anthony Wilson Thorold, prevented the building of a crematorium on consecrated land. The society had to look elsewhere and turn to Woking, the location of the 400-acre Brookwood Cemetery opened by the London Necropolis Company in 1854. In May 1878, the society purchased 1 acre of land from the company, and it was located in the St John's area of Woking. This is the only representation we have of the first Woking crematorium. It had a 70-foot chimney. An Italian, Professor Paolo Guerini, designed and supervised construction, which was completed in 1879. However, local residents, led by the Reverend Mr Oliphant, Vicar of St John's, Woking, mounted a campaign to prevent the building and operation of the cremator. They complained to the Home Secretary Richard Cross, who threatened to introduce legislation making cremation illegal if the society tried to operate their crematorium. Restrained by the Home Secretary's threat, the Society pledged not to cremate anybody at Woking until the legal position had been clarified. Cremation Society members continued to campaign. In 1880, Sir Thomas Spencer Wells presented a paper entitled Remarks on Cremation or Burial at the annual meeting of the British Medical Association. Wells encouraged members of the association to sign a statement in support of cremation, and this was submitted to William Harcourt, the Home Secretary. Another event that tested the relationship between the Home Secretary and the Cremation Society was the proposed cremation of two members of Captain Hannam's family. Hannam was a retired Royal Navy commander, a Justice of the Peace and a Deputy Lieutenant of Dorset. When his wife died in 1876 and his mother died the following year, Hannam stored their bodies in lead-lined elm coffins in a mausoleum in the grounds of Manston House, his estate in Dorset. The deceased women had made it clear that they wanted to be cremated, and Hannam was determined to carry out their wishes. At first he wrote to the Cremation Society and they offered the use of Woking crematorium. But Sir Henry Thompson was mindful of the undertaking he had given the Home Secretary, and this led to Hannam's resignation from the Society. The Society then withdrew their offer of assistance to Captain Hannam, and this resulted in the captain carrying out two cremations at Manston House, his home in Dorset. Significantly, the Home Secretary, William Harcourt, took no action following the cremations at Manston. An event in 1884 involving Dr. William Price further clarified the legality of cremation. Price was a well-respected physician in the south of Wales. He was a self-styled druid and wore green trousers, braided his long hair and wore a foxskin headdress, the emblem of a healer. When Price's 5-month-old son died, who was named in English Jesus Christ, Price wrapped the body in linen and took it to Caerlearn Fields, where he started to cremate the child in a barrel of paraffin. On that Sunday morning, people coming from the chapel saw the smoke and the flames on Caerlearn Fields and rushed to the scene. There they snatched the body of the child from the flames. Price was subsequently arrested by the police and indicted for causing the body of a child to be burnt instead of burying it. He was taken to the Cardiff Assizes, where he was tried on the 12th of February 1884. He was tried before Justice Stephen. In his summation, the judge concluded, "After full consideration, I'm of the opinion that a person who burns instead of burying a dead body does not commit a criminal act unless he does it in such a manner as to amount to a public nuisance." Price finally succeeded in cremating his son in March 1884 in front of a vast crowd at Lantrescent. The final event was in April 1884, when 3 Scottish MPs, Sir Leon Playfair, Sir Charles Cameron and Dr. Robert Farquharson, introduced a bill into Parliament to regulate the disposal of the dead, particularly by cremation. 79 MPs voted for the bill, but 149, so a majority of 70, voted against legalising cremation. Undeterred by this result, the Cremation Society nevertheless pursued their aim of offering Woking crematorium for cremation. In January 1885, the Cremation Society of England published this advertisement in the Times and other newspapers to inform the public that the Society was ready to initiate cremations at its Woking crematorium. The first cremation at Woking took place on the 26th of March 1885. The deceased, Jeanette Caroline Pickersgill, was a well-known writer and painter. Born in 1813 in Amsterdam, she married the English artist Henry Hall Pickersgill in 1837. Two doctors performed an autopsy on Mrs. Pickersgill, and she was cremated 6 days after her death. The red brick building we see today was not completed until 3 years after Mrs. Pickersgill's cremation. It was designed in the 13th century Gothic style by Edward Clarke, a little-known church architect based in London, and it was chiefly financed by the Dukes of Bedford and Westminster. Both were interested in the cremation movement. It was the first crematorium chapel in the United Kingdom. An attractive stained glass window is dedicated to Sir Henry Thompson and Sir Charles Cameron. Both were presidents of the Cremation Society. On the left is a red-robed figure commemorating Sir Henry Thompson. The torch held by the female figure represents cremation, and this symbol also is the flame of knowledge and of wisdom. The window on the right commemorates Sir Charles Cameron, who was the second president after Sir Henry died in 1904. She is carrying a ceramic urn designed by the Cremation Society. Above the two figures is an image of a phoenix rising from the ashes, surrounded by colourful flames, a wonderful symbol of the cremation movement. But the one key feature of the chapel was the catafalque. The catafalque is used for transferring the coffin from the chapel to the crematory. This catafalque in the chapel is particularly fine. It was designed and constructed in 1907, and it was presented and paid for by Rosemary Crawshay, a cremation movement supporter from Wales, and it was given in memory of her son Richard, who had died in 1903 and was cremated here. So the coffin rests on the catafalque, and during the ceremony the door will open and the coffin will be transferred away from the sight of the mourners and then be taken for cremation. The door will then be closed. And that really is the concluding part of the cremation ceremony. After being removed from the mourner's view, the coffin is taken to the crematory where the nameplate is checked. The coffin remains unopened and the handles and other furnishings are all left on the coffin. The cremator is preheated to around 800 degrees Celsius, and then the coffin is inserted into the cremator. After about 90 minutes, what's left are the bones. These are then crushed into the ashes that weigh between 4 and 8 pounds. And in the early days of cremation movement, ashes were generally buried in a grave or deposited in a columbarium. Each niche of the columbarium could contain one casket of ashes. This is one columbarium at Woking. There is another one adjacent to the chapel, which is much larger and is galleried. These niches would be purchased or leased for the retention of a casket of cremated remains. They could be permanently deposited here, or they could be just on temporary deposit, awaiting maybe the death of another family member and therefore for the two ashes to be buried in a family grave.
At the rear of the crematorium is a cemetery, and if we look around here we can see memorials just like those that you would see in any conventional cemetery in the UK, except these are all in miniature. It's rather surprising to see such a cemetery here, but in the early days the Cremation Society offered this piece of land for those who wanted to bury an urn of ashes and mark the spot with a memorial. The first burial was in January 1888, and burials continued here for quite a number of years afterwards. although burials no longer take place here.
Woking Crematorium has a variety of beautiful natural landscapes where ashes may be dispersed. Of course, an increasing number of ashes are taken away by family or friends. To return to the story of Mrs. Pickersgill, her ashes were placed in a terracotta urn which was transported to Kensal Green Cemetery in London. So I'm standing outside the chapel in Kensal Green Cemetery. It's a magnificent building, and beneath is a vast catacomb which is capable of holding around about 2,000 coffins. But one of the occupants is Jeanette Caroline Pickersgill, who was the first person to be cremated at Woking, which took place on the 26th of March 1885. But her ashes were not buried until 1887. In the meantime, another member of the Pickersgill family was cremated at Woking, William Crellin Pickersgill. Mrs. Pickersgill's and William's ashes were placed together, and they were contained in a terracotta urn which was then placed into a case. When I inspected Mrs. Pickersgill's casket in the catacombs, I found it in bad shape and collaborated with the cemetery staff and also the Friends of Kensal Green Cemetery to replace the casket. This replica casket, made from oak sourced in the Scottish Borders, was constructed by Kevin Denham, a carpenter and coffin maker. In March 2025, members of the Friends of Kensal Green Cemetery and other supporters gathered in the cemetery for a tour and also a lecture on the early years of cremation. The following week, Mrs. Pickersgill's ashes were transferred into the new container and returned to the shelf in exactly the same position where the ashes were placed 140 years ago.
Since March 1885, 170,000 cremations have taken place here at Woking Crematorium. But cremation was very slow to progress in the early years. In the first year, 1885, only 3 cremations took place here. There were 13 the following year and just 10 in 1887. At 1900, only 444 cremations took place at the 4 crematoria then in operation.
In 1902, the Cremation Act finally gave the Home Secretary the power to regulate cremation. Also in 1902, the Cremation Society opened its second crematorium at Golders Green, the first to be opened in London. Sigmund Freud, the Austrian neurologist, now known as the father of psychoanalysis, who died in 1939, is one of the many notable people who have been cremated at Golders Green. And in October 1905, the ashes of Sir Henry Irvine, an eminent English actor and manager, were interred in the Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey in London. It was the first burial of ashes in any Anglican abbey. However, the Anglican Church only began to widely accept cremation in the mid-1940s after the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. William Temple, was cremated in 1944. The Roman Catholic Church continued to prohibit cremation until 1963. The Cremation Society of England changed its name in 1930 to the Cremation Society of Great Britain to reflect the spread of crematoria in Scotland and Wales. In 1965, the number of cremations exceeded that of burials for the first time. In 2024, over 522,000 cremations took place at the 336 crematoria in operation. Today, just over 80% of deaths in the UK are followed by cremation, which is among the highest rates in the world.
The second edition of our book, From Dust to Ashes, which was published by Springer in 2025, tells the full story about the early years of cremation and then the developments right up to the present day. I hope you agree that the story of cremation in this country is an absolutely fascinating one.